Stand-up comedy show.
So I start.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Johannes. Well, very much welcome to everybody. Very happy to be here. We are here in COMECE. My name is, we are here in COMECE. So the person who should be doing this welcome is Father Manuel. Manuel Barrios is here. He is the Secretary General of COMECE, of which Johannes works also here. I'm Filipe Martins, so I'm a Jesuit. I'm the director of JESC, the Jesuit European Social Center. So with others, we work, sorry, just here something. So with others, we work here. We have a group of 6 organizations called ELSia, the European Laudato Si Alliance, working on themes of ecology. So part of this alliance, apart from COMECE, apart from JESC, is also we have CITSE, we have also Caritas Europa, we have Don Bosco International, and the sixth one is Justice and Peace. That's it, not to forget. So we thought about this idea of having this launching of the Laudate Deum and to have different visions about it. That's why 3 words of thanks. My first word of thanks is to the 3 guests we have here with us. Johannes will present them. We have a Jesuit companion, Xavier, to thank for his coming. He was sick, a bit sick these days, so making the effort to come. We have to thank for the coming of Josiane as well. Josiane arrived yesterday from Dubai, and I was asking Josiane, did you manage to sleep? And Josiane answered, on the weekend. So I'll sleep on the weekend. So, and finally, so we have online, she was not able to come directly in person. We have Marie Toussaint. So from the Greens, this European group or this political group of the European Parliament. Dear Marie, thank you very much for being present. I know you have a very tight agenda, but this availability of coming and so that we have different views to discuss and to speak about Laudate Deum, about Laudato Si, and the challenges we have at the European level. So this first word of thanks I would have. Just a second word of thanks, I also find important to thank for the people who helped preparing this session. So we have the publicity, we have the registration, we have a small reception in the back also at the end, and I think it's also fair to thank for the people who did it. Finally, the third word of thanks also for your presence, so it's good to have you here. We have around 40, expecting 45, 48 people, but especially online. We have a lot of people, so around, I think 90, it was the number. So sometimes we forget, we speak to the people who are here in the room, but also to thank the camera is there. So just to thank everybody who are in home, we had registration from all over Europe. So very much welcome. And my wish is that this discussion is enriching and challenging as well, because I think it's in our hands to do something. So these are my words. Okay, Johannes.
Yeah, thank you, Father Filipe. Just to go briefly through the program, at the beginning we will have Father Xavier du Benasset. He's the delegate Laudato Si of the Jesuit French-speaking province, so quite an expert on these issues. And he will introduce us to Laudate Deum. And afterwards we have 2 respondents. First, Marie Toussaint, who is a member of the European Parliament, Vice President of the Greens, and she will give us a political insight into this dimension. And the second respondent will be Josiane Gauthier, the Secretary General of CITSE, and hopefully she will also tell us a bit about Dubai, what she has experienced there, challenges, hopes. We'll see. Afterwards, we will enter into a short dialogue between our 3 guests. And when they're finished, we open the floor for Q&As. And then afterwards, we have a short reception in a different room at the end. So thank you for coming, and let's start with Father Xavier.
Great.
first slides. No problem. So the idea was to introduce quickly the text of Pope Francis, but first to make the link between this exhortation, Laudate Deum, and the encyclical Laudato Si was published in 2015, just before COP21. Then to present Laudate Deum as, let's say, an examination of conscience at world size. And how the political claim of Laudate Deum come from a deep analysis rooted, I would say, in prayer. And the last one is based on Laudate Deum and the European Union context and the Green Deal context. What kind of question could we put in dialogue between Laudate Deum and the EU? No, doesn't work. So just to keep in mind that Laudato Si was published just 6 months before COP21 in Paris, and that in a certain way it was a success in terms of impact of the Vatican on the international negotiations. Both because some Catholics negotiators or Catholic states felt encouraged to go a bit more into an engaging Paris agreement, but perhaps the greater impact was the link that the Pope made between the social crisis and the ecological crisis. And it was maybe the first text by the head of the Vatican State, an international state, that was linking social and ecological crisis so deeply. And so it was used by other international actors to say, well, as one of us has said, there is a double and same crisis, social and ecological. So we should take into account these two parts of the problems. So based on this experience, 8 years later, seeing, as the Pope said at the beginning of Laudate Deum, that nothing has really moved, he starts again, based on this good experience between Laudato Si and COP21, to speak only 3 months before Dubai, in order to influence, or at least to bring the voice of the Church inside the international negotiation, in order to repeat, let's hope, the same kind of experience than Laudato Si. So clearly, Laudato Si is a big text. I mean, it's a deep text. It's a big book. And Laudate Deum is only maybe 10 or 15 pages, depending on the edition. So Laudate Deum is not Laudato Si number 2. It's more a kind of implementation of Laudato Si in the context of 2023 and the COP28 negotiation. Next slide, please. Maybe 2 things that are deeply rooted in Laudato Si and that Laudate Deum repeats. Laudato Si is really built, as you can see between the 6 chapters, is really built in dialogue between the world and the Christian tradition. And there is an invitation of the Pope to be in dialogue, but not only an invitation, he's applying the dialogue as a method to build his own encyclical. And so this invitation to dialogue is what he's now doing again with Laudate Deum and COP28. There is really this willingness to enter into dialogue with different partners, and here with the international community, trying to negotiate about the climate issue. Next slide. The second point that is common between Laudato Si and Laudate Deum is that maybe the biggest point of Laudato Si was to bring the concept of integral ecology inside the Catholic social teaching. And this integral ecology is an invitation to look at the world as a fabric of four main relationships. The relationship with myself, with other humans, with creation, with nature, and with God, or at least with bigger than ourselves. And this vision of the world as a relational worldview is maybe the deepest proposition of Laudato Si. And so Laudate Deum is deeply rooted in this vision of the world. It doesn't repeat everything like in the big book of Laudato Si, but it's based on this worldview. After that, if we look at Laudate Deum, at this short text, we can really read it as an examination of conscience or a prayer of alliance with the different three steps. Thank you, forgive me, please, for tomorrow. And the first step, thank you, is the idea that in a Christian approach around things about nature, nature is not only nature, it's creation given by the Creator. So it's a gift, and for this gift, I should be grateful. And I can be in wonder and look around me and really say thank you. And many people have said that this Laudate Deum text is a very political text, and it's true, but they forget that it begins and it ends, number 1 and number 73, by praising God for all creatures and calling to the figure of Saint Francis of Assisi and of Jesus himself. So it's really a prayer, even if it goes quickly, and we'll see why, but it's really based on this first deep spiritual experience that all this care for creation and the common home is a gift of the Creator, and that we should be grateful and that we should be rooted in gratitude before moving to the next step. After that, the main part of the text would be in this prayer in 3 times around forgive me, because in number 2, the Pope says, well, I wrote Laudato Si 8 years ago, and more or less things have not moved quick enough, and the world is approaching a tipping point. And so I'm obliged, I feel obliged, to use the word obliged, to repeat again and to call to an urgent action. And there is something of a real examination of conscience here, where the Pope tries to name the roots of the problems. And he will name climato-scepticism, a growing technocratic paradigm, short-term profit, techno-solutionism, and marketing and fake news covering the ethical decadence of real power as some of the deep roots of the crisis we are in, and the points of blockage of internal negotiations. And this idea of naming climato-scepticism, short-term profit, etc., to name clearly where the problems are, is not to accuse someone or someone else, but to name the problems and then to be able to engage into the good fight, to be sure that we are addressing the problem where it is at the roots. And this is part of a spiritual path. There are spiritual fights that should be led, but it's not because they are spiritual that they are far away from Earth. They are real fights, and we should engage, at least as Christians, with the Pope inside these fights, calling for the help of God, even if we engage around these problems with other people who are from different religions or no religions. But yeah, the idea is to name the problem and to name where we should engage spiritual fights to try to move on, because things have not moved quickly enough in the past years. So after thank you and forgive me, there is the final step of this alliance prayer, examination of conscience, which is, please, for tomorrow, what do I need? And as the text clearly points out that personal efforts, ecological actions are good, but not enough, the Pope will ask for clear international actions. And he will give 3 criteria to say, well, what I expect from the COP28, donc 3 conditions: that the decisions are efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored, because that was what was lacking in the previous COP. So just before that, the Pope has made a kind of review of the last 27 COPs, and try to offer an analysis of this process. And so he says what we need today as a common humanity is an international community that really acts, and actions means efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored actions. So I think it was useful to take these 3 steps to analyze Laudate Deum, because if not, we may take the text as only a political text, and it's very good. At least in France, it has brought some debate inside the Catholic Church, saying, well, is the Pope doing too much politics? But I think it's missing the point that it ends with clear political petitions, but based on a deep spiritual examination of conscience. And so after this reading of Laudate Deum, if we move to a dialogue with the EU, and we can move to the next slide, maybe 4 points of questions to the EU. So this idea of 3 objectives for international measures, that they should be efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored. And can we say that the Green Deal is a good example of such efficient, obligatory, and readily monitored actions between different states? Because if yes, the EU may be a good example for the rest of the world, and it will be a service for everybody. The second point, that Laudate Deum is clearly targeting powerful people and powerful nations. So to the powerful, I can only repeat this question, say the Pope: what would induce anyone at this stage to hold on to power only to be remembered for their inability to take actions when it was urgent and necessary to do so? And for us, I think as European Union, are we ready as a powerful group of nations to lose power according to the old system to help to bring a new and just ecological future? And I think this is not an easy question in international negotiations. The third point of question may be around the big claim of Laudato Si around cry of the earth, cry of the poor, and the link between the ecological and the social crisis. This is a very difficult point. And so do we in Europe are able to make the link between ecological and social issues? And was the Green Deal built taking into account the voice of poor people or of the poor state inside the European Union? And is the Green Deal now taking care of the poor people in Europe and taking care of the poorest countries around the world? Or are we locking the European market and creating difficulties for poor countries? And the last one is that Laudate Deum is not only targeting clearly powerful people and powerful nations, but clearly naming the Occidental way of life as a problem. And so the question is, are we, as European people and Occidental people, really ready to change our ways of life? And maybe to, at least in maybe some of our countries and maybe the richest people in Europe, ready to decrease at material level our ways of life or not? And if not, if we only try to defend green growth and we don't face the fact that we should, at least part of us, decrease our ways of life, then there may be a gap between Laudate Deum and the EU approach. So yeah, that was 4 questions to give some points for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Xavier. Excited to hear from you more in the discussions. But now we turn first to Marie Toussaint, member of the European Parliament. Marie, you have been engaged for many years in ecological issues and environmental issues, and we're excited to hear about the political dimension of all of this. Please.
Yes, hello. That's good. Because I can see you, but I didn't know if you could see me. I didn't see the screen later. No, first of all, I want to say a real thank you. Thank you for your invitation, but also thank you for making those contributions to ecology. I'm a green activist and MEP. So thank you for adding your contributions and your attention and your mobilization to this work. It's really important for me to discuss with you today. I think that we need to have more of those conversations. So let me say this before we enter into this issue. But of course, we need to think. I heard the insistence on the deep examination of conscience. We need to think individually, and we need to think together on how we can change the direction that the world is taking today. So it's really important for me to be with you, and I hope that it's just the beginning of the discussion and that we will keep on discussing and thinking and building together in the coming years. I would have liked to be there with you in Brussels today. I'm unfortunately in Paris on my way to Bordeaux, where I live, and I need to be there tomorrow. So sorry for that, but I know that at some point in the future we will meet in real life and be able to keep up with this discussion in real life. I have different things to tell you, but since some questions were raised, I will try to answer them as well and as consciously and seriously as I can. I first want to begin with where we stand now. And we are waiting for the results of the COP28. And as it has been said, unfortunately, we have not seen real changes in the world since we signed the Paris Agreement and since the Laudato Si. We are approaching faster and faster to the tipping points. If we have not crossed them yet, we have overcrossed 6 out of 9 of the planetary boundaries. This is huge. Everything is interrelated, and we need to act. When we look at the numbers and the dynamics going on, we can see that even though in some places of the world, and of course the EU, we'll get back to that, but that if in some places of the world, well, we are decreasing a bit. Sorry?
Sorry, I was just coughing.
Okay, sorry. But we are decreasing our greenhouse gases emissions. What we see for the future is still an increase. We just increase a bit less fast, right? And this is not able to save the planet, and this is not able to save humanity. And this is going to create a lot of violence for the people, and a lot of despair, and a lot of lives hurt. And this is absolutely not what we need to do. So yes, we need this deep examination of conscience. And how do I explain the fact that we're not changing fast enough? Well, I would also rely on the Laudate Deum, talking about this way that we as societies, to focus on the numbers, on the profits, rather than on our humanity and our sensitivity. And also because we find solutions, somehow fake solutions, in the technocratic paradigm that the Pope was denouncing. And we see that with the issue of CCS, for instance, or even with the carbon credits, actually. We pretend that we're going to be able to capture the carbon, to stock it. For how long, we don't know, and we pretend that we're going to be able to capture it enough to save the future. This can't be happening. You can only capture a small, very, very small part of the carbon that we emit in the atmosphere. But we find ways also in the market with those carbon credits, whereas we know that we cannot plant enough trees to be able to absorb all the carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere. So we're finding ways just to lie to ourselves, to not recognize the truth, and to prevent ourselves to take the difficult decisions that need to be taken if we really want to be in a situation where we can save the world. I talked about everything being interrelated, and I can tell you that over the last months in the European Parliament, we've had many battles, really difficult battles, because at the beginning of the mandate, we were working on the Green Deal, and we managed somehow to adopt some decarbonization texts. For instance, getting rid of the thermic cars and other policies that were going in that direction. But when it came to protect nature, to protect the living, to protect the soil, the rivers, the forests, the animals, then it stopped. And it was actually okay to just transform a little the industry, but it wasn't okay to care for the other, to care for the non-human, but then also to care for ourselves. And this is a real battle that we're living right now. And when the question that is raised is, can the Green Deal be an example for the others? At the same time, I want to say yes, and I want to be proud about what we did in the EU. But at the same time, I say, wow, let's be really careful, because what we see right now is the will to also put nature on the market, because the new, and this is related with this technocratic paradigm that we are locked in, right? But the new idea of, well, Brussels people, basically, but also finance people and international people, well, it's to put a price on nature, on the ecosystems, on their functions, and put it on the market with the idea that this is going to save nature if we put a price on it. Well, the only result that would have is to increase, fakely increase, the numbers of GDP in the world, but it wouldn't help to protect nature, and it wouldn't help to fight against poverty and inhumanity. This wouldn't work. So the Green Deal might be an example for the rest of the world if we ensure that the next majority, political majority that will be in place from the 9th of June onward, is a majority that is willing to push through the Green Deal. But then it goes to the second question, right? The Green Deal was supposed to be adopted while leaving no one behind. That was the sentence. We will do the Green Deal while leaving no one behind. And we didn't see anything concrete behind that. We didn't see anything. We have a principle that was considered as binding. It was the do no harm principle on the environment. Well, we debate about it and we discuss it, but that's normal. But there is no concrete binding aspect to the leave no one behind principle. And this is something that we really need to change. If we want a new, just and ecological future, as we say, then we need to change this. And my ecological fight, and I'm coming from the Fourth World Movement. I don't know if you know them, but that's an NGO that was funded by a priest who considered the poor as his people and considered that we cannot lead a fight without working with the people that are living in a situation of privation. And my ecological fight then, coming from there, is a necessity also, is necessarily also a fight for equality, a fight for equal dignity, a fight for justice. This is what also I'm trying to do in my campaign right now, inspired by integral ecology voices. But when I promote natural rights in the EU, in my everyday activism life, when I work in order to recognize the ecocide, the gravest crimes against nature, well, what I try to do is I try to empower unheard voices. Because what I really strongly believe is that when we hear to the poorest of us, we can also hear the solutions to really protect nature. And we can take examples throughout the planet. And this is also linked to the other questions afterwards. But when you listen to the people who are being intoxicated by the very toxic textile waste that Western countries send to the poorest countries, or toxic plastics or toxic pesticides and so on, then when we hear those voices, when we just tendre l'oreille, then we know that we must cease to produce those toxic products. And it's the same on our territory. If we look, for instance, at the travelers, we always put them in very dangerous places, in places where the environment is toxic as well. So the way that we need to act now is to say the first will be the last and the last will be the first, like Saint Mark. And this is the way we must apprehend this Green Deal, which wasn't done in the previous mandate, but the way I really want to push for the new mandate to go through. And we have a lot of work to do in that direction. We have to organize completely our societies, reorganize our societies with other priorities than the ones that are being here and now. And we cannot be any longer possessed by the demon of money. We cannot be longer possessed by the madness of destruction. We have to get out of this society that is only looking at the screen of growth of GDP without caring about any other feelings and emotions and necessities and criteria and so on. So this is linked to your third question, right? I think I answered it as well. And of course, caring is the key. And we really need to work for a Europe of care. And this is a huge shift from what has been done before, right? The right wing, like the left wing, they have discussed about the redistribution of the product of growth. But now we need to answer this question: what is needed? What does the other need? How can we care for each other on the European territory and, of course, abroad? And, well, I will end up also on this European way of life and the transformation that we need to go towards good life or good living, as some say, right? We can change. It can be good. It can be good also for the meaning, this examination of conscience that we were discussing before. But then we really need to change together and to act in solidarity with each other, with a lot of generosity towards each other, because in the end, this is the generosity that we will get back to us. So here is my contribution as for now, and happy to follow up the discussion.
Thank you very much. Our second respondent, Josiane from COMECE, you just came back, well, yesterday from Dubai, from COP28. Well, obviously we want to hear about that.
Yes, and I haven't had time to digest everything, and it's still going on. So I don't want to read into any crystal balls, but I'll share what I've experienced so far, and that probably frames my impressions for this evening and what I want to share. Already, thank you very much for the first two speakers. It really set the table, and it really put things in perspective and in context. So it really helps me to share from there, that starting point. Yes, returning from Dubai. I found it very interesting because as Father Xavier was speaking, I put the parts together in my head, which I had not completely put together, which was that Laudato Si was a precursor, or was announcing the Paris Agreement at COP21, and Laudate Deum comes when we're at the global stocktake of COP28. So it's also an examen de conscience, the global stocktake, which is a moment where we're checking in on the Paris Agreement. Where are we? Where are our commitments? How are we doing? We need to adjust our ambitions going forward. We clearly have not done enough. We clearly are not going fast enough. And the situation is only worsening. So the urgency only rises, because if we're slow, then the work is even higher and the cost is even higher. So we're running around ourselves. And so this actually comes at a very good time. It provokes a very serious conversation that has to happen. And I think that the Pope's words, not only in Laudate Deum, but also his opening statements that were read by Cardinal Parolin, and also his opening words for the inauguration of the Faith Pavilion, which I was at, which was a smaller little event that maybe less people heard about, were also strong words to the faith actors, how to take on the responsibilities at COP, because he could not be there with us, but he wanted his messages and his hopes and his concerns to be carried by others. And so we were given mission, I think, to do our best while we were there and to continue working. So yeah, I hope I can bring some of that energy and the hope, but also some of the concerns and the preoccupations of people who are still at the negotiations right now, and all the people they're fighting for, because this is a very well-attended gathering, the COP. It's the most people, I think, that have been to a COP. And that is impressive because it shows great interest, great engagement and mobilization. But it's also of some concern considering the footprint of this COP, that so many people are there. And it's a big question for us, because how do we ensure that all voices are heard and that everybody is there that needs to be there, without hurting ourselves as we do it? So how do we find that balance of hearing the voices of all without hurting the planet? So this will be an exercise that we'll have to think about, to be more creative probably, about who participates in these negotiations. Some of the delegations are enormous, and some of them include industry. And this is also a concern. At COP, we have the most lobbyists and representatives of the fossil fuel industry in history at a COP so far. At this meeting. So there's a lot of paradoxes in this meeting. On the one hand, we're seeing things move faster than we expected in certain areas. There is a loss and damage fund that was created, something people have been fighting for over a decade for. What is the loss and damage fund? It's something that we failed to do in the last 2-3 COPs, which is to ensure that we recognize that climate change is already killing people, already displacing people, already taking them away from their lands, already causing irreparable damage, irreversible damage to people's lives. So the fund is a mere compensation for the hurt that already exists in the world. It's not a solution. It's not prevention. We don't want to have to use such a fund, but we're already there. So that fund was created, fantastic. But the amount of money that's in there right now, I mean, $650 million. We know We know how much money transits through industry, through sports, through all sorts of other areas of commercial, music, cinema, whatever. This is what we have so far for loss and damage. So it's not enormous. We really need to work harder on that. Also, the mechanisms around that fund are problematic. Right now, it's in the hands of the World Bank. Okay, it's an existing institution, it's efficient. But how accessible will this be to communities who actually need it? How complicated will it be for people to access this help, to repair little bits of their lives? So this is just an example of yes, there's positives, but there's so many challenges still, and it's still too little for the needs, the enormous needs and the great crisis that we're facing. We also know from Laudate Deum that we have to reform this space. As I said, the level of participation, who goes, who decides, who speaks, who's present. I mean, there were indigenous people there, fantastic. There were youth people there, fantastic. But the overwhelming, I think it's something like 10 times more industry than indigenous voices or something like that. So, I mean, they're not the right people around the table for this conversation. And that's part of the problem. There needs to be a reform. And that's already stated as well in Laudate Deum. We need a reform of these political spaces. We need a reform of the ways decisions are made so that they really serve the common good and they really serve the poor and they really serve the planet and protect creation. There are many things still on the table. And so what we're hoping for in the next week, and that the Pope's clearly asked for in Laudate Deum and then repeated himself, just to be clear, in his opening statement, and then again in the message to the Faith Pavilion, was we need an elimination of fossil fuels. We need to work towards that. And that is really a clear request when he talks in Laudate Deum about the energy transition being fair and obligatory, and this is what needs to happen, and it needs to be funded. So the other big issue is finance. There needs to be money. There needs to be money. The money has to be dedicated to fighting the climate change, making the transition, making it possible for less industrialized or less developed countries to have access to money for the transition, so that they're not so dependent on the fossil fuels. But it also has to be differentiated. The greatest polluter countries, with our way of life, have to make the biggest sacrifices, not just financially, but in our consumption, in our ways of life, in our behavior. And so we have to recognize the difference in history and the benefits that we've had of the destruction of creation. We've lived very well based on the destruction of creation. And so we have a responsibility, a heightened responsibility where we are to take stronger action and have more courage. And this is also another theme that comes up in Laudate Deum, and which we have been pushing forward as well, and it came up in the different statements, the courage to act and to really challenge the way power is distributed unfairly right now. And it's a lot of question of power and influence, and how do we redistribute that power and share it in a way that's for the common good. And so again, it comes back to whose voices are we listening to? And Marie Toussaint said that as well, like, who are we listening to? Whose solutions are we listening to? The technocratic paradigm is extremely present at COP right now. There are a number of pavilions. It's like a science fair. There's so many technological advances being proposed in all these pavilions and all these countries, showing us how much they've invested in all this technology that will, be so creative. Fantastic. Yes, let's do scientific research. I think that's wonderful. But that is not going to save us. At least not only that. And we really have to make some changes in many other aspects of our lives, not just rely on the hope that pouring more money into these dreams that technology is going to save us is going to somehow forgive us our responsibility to actually change anything. And this applies to politics, and it applies to economies. The other thing that is missing, and the call that I heard, and I call it differently, but we call it decolonization. I think we have to decolonize that process, decolonize economies, decolonize the way we're materializing the climate and nature and creation, and the extractivism of our relationships with each other and with nature. We extract, we use, and we throw away. people, things, nature, resources. This is how we do it. We chew it up and we throw it away. And this is a waste economy that we're in with each other and with nature. And that has to be transpired into politics and into policies. So it was mentioned that everything is interconnected. This is true as well. We cannot deal with the climate crisis if we're not dealing with the social crisis, if we're not dealing with the equality crisis, with the power imbalances between nations, between generations. We have a debt to the next generation already, which is so high, we'll never be able to pay it back. But can we start to change our attitudes, thinking that what we're doing now, we're passing on to others? And so that responsibility of justice towards the next generations, many generations to come already, if we can already shift that perspective, and also justice between continents. So that's when we talk about the decolonization of our minds and of our approach to climate justice, is it has to go beyond our borders. There is no such thing as borders when it comes to climate. It's clearly anything we do in this space in Europe directly impacts anybody just outside of Europe. Europe is an artificial creation. Nature goes far beyond. We are using each other's water. We are using each other's air. And we cannot just have a Green Deal that applies in Europe and say we've done our job, or we've got our indicators for Europe and we've done our job, when we're externalizing emissions or we're decreasing capacity in other countries in order to give ourselves better marks. So these are questions that are troubling. And it's a huge list of challenges, but the good news is that there's energy, and the messages and the Catholics and the faith actors are organized. And I'm here to tell you that, because at the COP, we were just the Catholics. We were a network of people that met several times just in the week that I was there. We met with the Holy See delegation. The Holy See delegation is sitting down with the Catholic actors and listening to civil society, and that's also written in Laudate Deum, that the civil society has to be an actor, and that the activists are not to be punished, but listened to, and that the children and the youth that are angry, it's for a reason, and that we should not just shove them away, but give them a space at the table and listen to their frustrations. So this is being applied. And there is a listening and synodal approach, which is beginning. And so I think these are signs of hope, that we're coming together. The Faith Pavilion was also a first, that there's a Faith Pavilion. There were problems about where the money came from to pay for the Faith Pavilion, I will admit. However, it's there now, and we have occupied it. And we hope that there will be an interfaith pavilion in future COPs, because it's a space for dialogue between the faiths and shared responsibility. Because we all have that shared responsibility, and we can bring the moral discussion into the negotiations. And maybe that's what I'll finish with, and we can continue in the conversation after. But I heard some really beautiful things in the Faith Pavilion and in some of the side events from other faith actors. And that's what I thought was so rich, was that we were hearing from each other in different, because sometimes, we speak to each other and we speak to ourselves. And we hear the same language, and it's comforting. But it's nice to listen to how other people formulate things, and it provokes a little bit of a reflection. And then we come at it from a different angle and we look at it differently. And there was a Muslim professor who said something really great. He said that the Western education system has produced individualism and independent selfhood, instead of helping us to recognize our interdependence, our community, and our common responsibility towards one another. And I thought it was a very beautiful way of saying we have to change the way we educate. We have to change the way we speak about humanity to each other, and that will begin a wave of transformation. And another actor from one of the Protestant churches said that we need a multi-faith climate revolution. And I really liked the way she formulated that. And I thought, yes, let's sit with that a little bit and see how we can bring that up. And I'll leave you with those thoughts. I have a lot more, but maybe in the conversation we'll go in deeper. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Josiane. When you talked about the science fair, it reminded me of this quote from Laudate Deum, where the Pope says, "To suppose that all problems in the future will be able to be solved by new technical interventions is a form of homicidal pragmatism, like pushing a snowball down a hill." He's using quite harsh language. Yes. But of course it's true. Well, I open now the floor for the dialogue between the three of you, and whoever wants to start. I think for Marie-Thérèse would be best if she raises her hand on Zoom. But yeah.
Maybe one question, because Josiane, you mentioned it, and Marie, you also talk about to listening to poor voices in the political system, and you mentioned the need to reform the COP system if we want to hear to these unheard voices. Once we've said that, how does it happen? When we say that the COPs have so much things to do and they have difficulties to do so, how can we reform the only tool we have to have international negotiation? Can we really hope that it can happen, or must we start a process beside the COPs? What maybe with the interfaith things, how can we connect this willingness to hear to other voices and with a system that is already running?
I don't know if Marie already wants to come in, but I can share something that a partner, the Jesuits in Asia, shared with us, is that they suggested, why not COP at home? Create spaces to gather input and reflections from a broader base, so similar to the synodal process, actually, but within regions where there's less movement, less travel, and where it's possible to have a more local conversation. You can bring in international voices to add to that, but then it would be smaller spaces, more maybe decentralized, and it doesn't all have to happen once a year in one place. Maybe there's a possibility of having a more localized conversation which feeds in. And this would take a lot of coordination, but I think that at this point, we're not getting that coordination at COP anyway. It's almost impossible with delegations of several hundreds attending multiple conversations at once. Delegations have a hard time pulling their ideas together. And not everything has to happen during those 10 days a year. We as advocates, as people, we work all year long to speak to elected officials that will be going to COP. Why can't we be resolving this all the time? Why do we have to wait until next year to have the conversation again? Why can't we be constantly advancing on these issues? So this is, maybe we can think differently about the timeline, think differently about the spaces, and legitimize conversations that are happening at other levels, maybe to advance the discussion. So this is just an idea, maybe.
Yeah, I can jump in as well, indeed. I'm actually not sure that we don't need those moments of international reunions. However, we need to change them really deeply. And I would point into two directions. The first one is the room that we leave to the lobbies. And this is crazy with this COP28, of course. I mean, the COP, the international diplomatic discussions on climate are chaired by one CEO of an oil industry, one that did not commit to get out of fossil fuels quickly, but that committed to keep on producing fossil fuels. So this is really exemplary. To ensure that he has staff working for the COP28, he hired the staff from his oil company. And we are in the COP28, and we now have almost 2,500 lobbyists from the oil and gas industry that are present into the negotiations. We don't know how it's going to end. Maybe it's going to end in a good way, and I would be really happy about it. But I would still be frightened by all the contracts that are being signed behind, because that's what's happening as well. And I'm talking from France, where the president has given the accreditation to Patrick Pouyanné, who is the CEO of the biggest French oil energy company, Total, to represent us at the COP28. And I'm coming from the EU, where we have given a former person from Shell and McKinsey, who is one of the biggest consulting firms of the lobbying industry. We have given him the role to discuss in those negotiations and defend the position of the EU. So maybe it's going to end in a good way again, but I'm not sure about it. And even though on the paper it would be written in a good way, I would still be really worried about how it's going on. But then what do we need to do? And one of the issues is that we have the international elite coming there, and diplomatic, economic, but also the NGOs. And I'm coming from the world of NGOs, so I know these are also part of the elite. So how can we change this? And I think that this indeed must be dealt with at the local level. And I'm fighting in France and in the EU to ensure that in the way that we create the different public policies that are being set in place, we have mechanism to ensure that we listen to the voice of the poorest. This is not easy. This requested a lot of energy, a lot of organization to ensure that we do listen to the voices of the poorest, of the most excluded, of the unheard, and that these voices are filling the positions that we take. And in this way, also for climate, this would be really useful. And I think that both on the public policies that are led on our territory, but also in the way we create exchanges, discussions with the entire world, we would be in a better position, finally, to ensure that we do go towards this new green and just ecological transition and that you were talking about before.
Maybe I can jump in with a question. We talked about lifestyles and of course the need to change lifestyles, and Pope Francis is also very clear on this when he speaks about the Western lifestyles. And obviously we're all in favor of phasing out fossil fuels here, not at COP, but here. But of course, I think it leaves still the main philosophical problem if we just change our input of energy. Because obviously we talk about renewable energies, and of course the sun and the wind is free and almost infinite. But of course the raw materials to produce solar power plants, wind power plants are not. It's the first one. And the second one, and this is maybe the global dimension, and this concerns the European Green Deal too, is that of course it leads to the dangers of extractivism, which we can see in much of the global south, horrifying working conditions for many people, mining those raw materials we need so we can transition faster. Just throwing it out here. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, there were voices, they were calling it the second scramble for Africa, basically. So very reminiscent of colonial patterns, running after raw materials and the things required for the green transition, and calling it green extractivism. So yes, it's a false solution to try to just replace our level of, to not change our level of consumption and simply replace what we're using.
Right.
And there's even a danger that we consume more because we somehow are freed in our conscience, you know, that we're somehow doing better. So we see that with like electric cars and so on, where you see people adding an electric car to their fleet instead of replacing, you know, their standard car with an electric vehicle. Or so that's a problem. That's a problem, and it's a real problem that we're actually increasing our consumption and simply adding on the green consumption on top of our more dangerous consumption. And as you mentioned very rightly, there's a serious concern at what cost. At what cost? At what cost to communities, to indigenous communities, to biodiversity, to land rights? There's a lot of issues there. We talk a lot about the just transition. It's an old term, and it was a labor term, and it was about people not losing their jobs. But it's much more than that. It's just to whom, fair to whom, and to what, you know, and are we fair to nature in our transition? So I think the Pope mentions it, but I think we know the answer. It's just not a very comfortable one.
Yeah.
We have to consume less, much less. And we have to somehow accept a different economic system, perhaps, where growth is not the only way to measure our well-being. But this is a revolution. This is a conversion.
Well, I mean, the Pope specifically calls into question our view of economic growth. But then maybe for you, Marie, von der Leyen at her State of the Union speech mentioned explicitly that the European Green Deal will definitely keep our growth model. So how do we solve this?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying before. We still are, even for those who do have a concern over ecology and climate, and I do believe that Mrs. von der Leyen does have one concern, but we still are locked in this paradigm of technocracy, right? In this idea that only the numbers written on the GDP in the end of the year do matter, and that this should be the compass of everything. This is not the case. First of all, we can see for a long time now that the augmentation, the increase of the GDP numbers are not bringing any more welfare to the people. It's not helping us fighting poverty. It's not helping us getting everyone a house. It's not helping saving people from dying at sea. But it's also, okay, my head is turning right now. Okay, I see a door. Well, okay, I will keep on. Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit disturbing to see a door. That wasn't really the best way to keep on talking to you. Thanks a lot. So it's also not helping us saving the planet. On the contrary, we keep on consuming more and more of what the planet gives us every year. So this cannot be our only compass. And this goes also to the debate over green growth and ecological growth. Does it exist or not? I think this is not the issue here. The issue is how do we ensure that in the way we conduct our societies and as such our public policies, but I'm an MP, right? So that's my issue to deal with those European public policies. How do we ensure that this does answer to the needs of the people? How does it answer to the need for care for the other? And this is how we need to change the way we conduct those policies. So for instance, what I'm proposing is an environmental treaty to ensure that the EU, yes, we do have common rules for budgetary balance. Okay, that's normal. We need a solidarity, right? But this shouldn't prevent the investments that are needed in the ecological and just transition. But we do need those rules. But the biggest rules, the highest rules that we must have is to wonder how can we converge towards the respect of the planetary boundaries, and how the EU comes from a moment and an economy where we overcross 6 out of 9 of the planetary boundaries to an EU that does not cross any of those planetary boundaries. And this can be a treaty, and this can be binding among the member states. So we can do that. And we can also ensure that the social rights are being binding, as I was discussing before. So we have bases, we have the SDGs, we have the social pact, all of those, gather some social objectives. But I also want to install a social veto on the public policies. And we can have social impacts studies, assessments on the laws and the budgets, as we do have environmental impact assessments on some of them. And we can have those social impact assessments, and we can decide, and this is up to us, that anytime one of the laws, one of the projects, one of the budgets that we adopt, every time that it worsens the conditions of the 10 and 20% of the poorest, we just don't adopt it. And those are very common rules that would help us staying between the ceiling of the environmental planetary boundaries and respecting as well the most fundamental social rights and human rights.
Marie, you can hear me?
Yes.
I was making a joke when we were looking at the door. That's what we are looking for. It's the door. So the door to get out of, or to find a new way. I would have a question, and it's a question for the three of you also. especially in a parliament, for instance, when you talk with your colleagues or you discuss this and they have very different views, how do you read it? Are they mean? Are they not convinced that we have to change? Are they not concerned with the others? I find this dialogue with the difference interesting. So the Pope calls for the conversion. When Josiane, when you speak with MPs or other actors who are not, so how do you read? How you try to convince? And Xavier would do the same question, because it's true. If for one hand Catholics trying to follow the call of the Pope, but on the other hand, also people saying, so this is not so urgent or not so important. How do you dialogue with the other? So what is your experience, what you have in your heads? How do you try to convince them that this conversion is needed? It's something that sometimes I have in my head, this question. So what solutions do you propose?
Well, to rely on you to help us. No, in truth, this is not easy. This is not easy at all, because this is such a change of philosophy, of culture, of way of seeing the world, that, as I said, some people are concerned with the state of the environment. And despite that, they stay locked in some old-fashioned way of seeing the world, right? They are locked in this very mechanic way of working. Some others are really concerned about social justice, and they don't manage to bring both of them together. But those are real shifts that are needed. And I see that also as an activist, as a cultural battle, right? That we need to move on. Of course, I guess you use other words and other ways to move forward, but these requests, of course, are a complete mobilization. And in the European Parliament, in the political landscape, we do lead battles. And on each issue, we try to find new alliances. And for instance, on the recognition of ecocide and the gravest crimes against the environment, I went to look for allies in different countries from different parties, right? I went to look for one right-wing from the Netherlands, one from Finland, one from Romania. And this is also the chance that we have in the European Parliament and in the European institutions to be able to find partners that are not the closest to us, but we still can find ways to work together. We can do that issues per issues. But changing the entire frame of thinking, well, this is something else that we all need to work in coordination to push in that direction.
If I look at it from maybe a Catholic side and maybe the Jesuit world where I'm more in charge, maybe the opportunity we have is that the spiritual door is the good door to start all together to speak about difficult subjects. And then recently I was called in one of the Jesuit spiritual centers in Brittany to give a workshop during 2 days around Christian eco-spirituality to 40 people who are giving retreats, not eco-retreats, normal retreats inside inside the spiritual center. And they were really willing to learn and to hear about Laudato Si and how you can offer it to people coming to the center to receive retreats and to receive spiritual direction, because they start to see people coming, having questions, deep questions, Christian questions, spiritual questions around the ecological transition. What am I going to do after my studies? Should I change my job? We are going to get married at the church, but we are not sure we want children in this world. So the questions are starting to raise from the ground, from the people they have to accompany. And so they were really willing to listen to how do you take this, not from an ideological point of view, but from a spiritual point of view, based on praying with the gospel, praying with nature, even more, and that was not in the agenda, but 10 days before this workshop, the place was totally destroyed during the strong storm that came on the western part of France. And on the ground of the spiritual center, 150 trees were destroyed in 30 seconds. So the place was totally devastated. And so people were really deeply impacted by the catastrophe they had in front of them. And so when you were saying, well, climate change is going to increase such extreme weather events, well, it was not only words, it was here in front of them, in this place they love, and they see people coming for retreats and really enjoying the fact that the place is a real companion for the spiritual path. So I think inside the church, maybe we have the advantage that we can start the conversation on a common spiritual basis and move forward from this place. It's not always easy, not at all, but we can use this gift.
You know, Felipe, I mean, speaking with others, with politicians, with others who may not share a perspective, I mean, we can have this conversation even in our own families. We can have differences, profound differences of opinion on these issues. This becomes very, very personal for a lot of people. And so it's hard because we're engaged emotionally in the discussion. And somebody at the COP, a young woman from the Pacific Islands, said this is a spiritual problem in need of a spiritual answer. And that means that in the way you approach the conversation, the dialogue, you have to have this present. So maybe you don't have the same language, the spiritual language, but you still have to have it in you as you approach the conversation, because change is terrifying for most people. And they would rather stay in a dangerous situation that they understand or think they know than to take the risk to make a change towards something they don't understand or don't know. And the fear of the unknown, and what will happen to me if I stop doing this, or if I change my lifestyle, is a big leap. And people don't trust it. They're afraid of it. So I think we have to try to bring into all of those conversations the element of care, of dialogue. So I need to care about the person that I'm dialoguing with. I have to be in a non-judgmental posture with that person so that I can actually be open and I can somehow make that person care about me in the conversation. And maybe in that moment where we care about each other, we might actually listen better to each other and not be in judgment of where we're coming from, and just appreciate that we're coming from different perspectives and different experiences. It connects also to having care for the stories of others. In a lot of our work, our advocacy work, we bring voices with us into conversations about very technical, political, detailed conversations. We will just bring people who have a lived experience to share. So we bring it to simply a human connection issue. And once there's a contact, a human connection, and we fundamentally want connection. We fundamentally are always looking for who we can connect with. And if we can create opportunities for a safe connection between people, there can be a tiny shift, just a tiny, tiny shift, a little opening of light, that maybe you look at things a little bit differently because you met somebody who had an impact on you that day. So we try to create those tiny spaces of connection, and we bring community actors, we bring people who are who have a very special way of sharing their story that helps to connect with leaders. And the last thing I would say is to try to be inspired by the Joy of the Gospel by Pope Francis as well, which is one of my favorites. And because simply you have to model it. I mean, you have to model that there is joy in the change, in the conversion, and not the fear of the change, but that there is happiness and there's something good on the other side of this decision that we all have to make to change our lifestyles. And that somebody might come up to you and say, what is it about your life that makes you joyful and happy? And you say, well, I know what I have to do. And, you know, I have changes I have to make in my life. I haven't made them all, but I know what I have to do. I have a plan. and then people might say, well, tell me about it. You know, like, tell me what's stimulating you, you know, in this, and what are the questions that you're asking yourself? And we make ourselves curious. And where there's curiosity, there's less fear. So, I mean, these are just things that I think we have to just bring into our conversations, because we come from a culture that is so combative, that is all about debate. It's all about convincing the other by dominating with stronger arguments, it's a very power imposed kind of way of talking to people. And the whole lobby advocacy universe is very much based on that sort of.
Like our economic system.
Exactly, very competitive. And I think we need to sort of take the competition out and find the cooperation, and then there's an opening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we have to open the floor for questions.
That's my next one.
My name is Fabien. I work for Megawatt. It's a French think tank working on energy transition. There is a big issue that you've addressed almost indirectly, which has huge potential for emissions reduction at the EU level, at the global level, but also at the EU level, and which is directly linked with the Christian values, which is sobriété. The word sobriété in English, the translation is sufficiency. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to know, the IPCC has also given a definition. It's getting even more attention, but it has a very untapped potential. It's the easiest way of reducing emissions is consuming less. You addressed it, be it energy, critical raw materials, water, resources in general. And I just wanted to know if this is an issue that the Catholic Church is addressing in its work, working with EU institutions. And maybe for Marie Toussaint, also a question if this is a word that is going to be used for the Greens going into the next EU elections, because we think as Megawatt that it has a big potential, also addressing the just transition issues, because it's not only about just reducing consumptions, it's also you've addressed the issue of the getting more a decent level of services for certain categories of the population. So I just wanted to know if this is an issue that is going to have some importance for you.
I'm sorry, I can ask, I didn't get the word. You said, are you going to use this word? But I didn't get which word.
Sobriété.
Sobriété. Aspect in English that we know in French is sobriété. So meaning, for some people, it's about getting sufficient level of services, of transport, of food, of access to education, etc.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is João Fernandes. I'm just passing by Brussels. I'm from Oikos, Portugal, an organization that is working in the America and Africa, both in development and in conservation. And one of the questions that we face is the fact that when we talk like the European Union in the Green Deal, in fact, there is no reflection on who is winning and who is losing with public policies. There is no single public policy that has no losers. So I think one of the questions that we could add to the three criteria that the Pope addresses, like the efficiency, one is the alignment with certain objectives that we should discuss first. Like we discussed certain objectives in Paris. They were not, there was not a sufficient discussion with the sectors of the European society, like about the European Union. We are losing the fight for the just transition. It was a labor movement, but right now the labor movement in Europe is lacking representation for workers who are fighting for their rights. This has some consequences with far right, far left, etc. Like in Portugal right now, there was an agreement between the doctors from the health system with the government, between the trade union and the government. The majority of the workers was set aside. They said, no, we do not agree. So, and this is a very dangerous step, because we are concerned with the poor in the poorest countries. But in fact, if we see the public policies that are financed by the European Union, do not address who is losing. In our country, this is very, very, very sensitive. And we are losing the people.
Two more. Right. To a religious congregation called Missionaries of Africa, also known as White Fathers. Here in Brussels, I work at Africa, Europe, Faith and Justice Network. I have two questions. The first one, I think, is for both of you seated here, and the second one is for Madam Christian. So the first question would be, do you think the fact that the Pope has raised so much scientific evidence in Laudate Deum would convince more people? Because I, for one, was very touched, and I was very moved, because I was expecting to see a lot of religious texts in the text of the Pope, but he has raised a lot of scientific evidence to convince all the doubters, and really going back as De Janeiro, and going through all the history of all the important documents and how the world has behaved. So, is that convincing enough, or what more can the Pope do? Or who is going to bring more evidence to convince the doubters if they are not convinced by that? The second question addressed to Susan. Since the rise of China, I've tend to read like there has been a paradigm shift or the change of tone by the EU, especially, and also the Americas and ally, when it comes to climate change and when it comes to natural resources. It seems that there is a struggle for natural resources between China and EU. I don't know if this has changed the attitude towards climate change. Thank you.
Maybe we can give him Marie the last word. She has to. We just heard. Marie, we just heard you have to leave very quickly. Maybe your last word.
I'm sorry, because the sound was really, really bad for me. So I didn't understand all of the questions. I heard the first one about sobriety, being sober. Well, I don't know how this is said in English exactly, but I didn't hear the next ones, well, because of the sound and technical things. So this is also with being online and not with you in real life, which again I regret. So just to say this, of course, being sober is one of the biggest issues. This is really important, first of all, for ourselves, and I think that well, that's also what allows us as a person, as an individual, to share with the others, not having so plenty that goes in every direction for yourself, being able to share and have the right amount of what you need. This is also important for the EU. So of course we will fight for this, and in our relations to the world. And we witnessed Vladimir Putin's attacks on Ukraine. We were still really dependent on the Russian gas. And we were as dependent on the Russian gas as we were 20 years ago, when we were already committed to get rid of our dependency to Russian gas. But because we consumed more and more gas, we stayed dependent to the Russian gas. And right now what we're doing is buying a lot of new and building a lot of new LNG infrastructures, way too much for the climate and way too much compared to our needs, even without any sobriety policies and efficiency policies. And we are signing contracts with regimes that are not respecting human rights and that are going in war, for instance, Azerbaijan, for instance, Qatar, but we're also signing gas contracts with the US and for gas that is extracted on the territory of local poor communities. And all of this is not aligned with our values, and this is not aligned with our will to protect the climate. And we need to go towards less dependency, so less consumption, so being towards an horizon of sobriety. And what we want to promote is a society of sobriety and justice, sobriety and sharing. And this is really the cap that we're giving ourselves, what we try to push every day in the European Parliament, and also what we want to promote for the next EU elections. And I'm very sorry because I have a meeting also in 3 minutes that I need to go to. But really looking forward the follow-up of this discussion. And thanks a lot for all the thoughts that you have and that you are sharing.
I can react to before we take questions. There's so many questions already.
No, it's to the first round. Maybe also to listen Xavier and Josiane.
Yeah, I think on the question of sufficiency, yes, we are working on it. You're right, I didn't use the word, but it's very much in our narrative. And I think it's related to the planetary boundaries that we were talking about. And it's a change of narrative. It's a change of mentality because it's also about what is enough and who needs to be raised to have enough and who has more than enough. And it's a difficult discussion for a lot of people, but I think it's very much at the heart of what we're talking about. And I think that touches on the issue of the working class and the middle class, because who's paying for the transition? And I'm not an economist, but we know there's something very wrong with the way wealth is being concentrated and distributed, so that the energy is being paid for by the working class and the working poor and the middle class. And because these are not the people who have so much expendable income to afford the transition. So there's a problem with tax evasion. There's a problem with subsidies to corporations. There's all sorts of other financial problems and fiscal problems that need to be addressed also to finance the transition. And I think that's part of, there's a whole packaging issue there that needs to be addressed that's not being said out loud. But a lot of people are working on this, and I think that they need to be brought in to the fold. And I think the labor movements and the tax analysts and the finance analysts have to be brought together to find solutions that are more fair for society as a whole, so that there's social justice and climate justice. So that's just a very general, but I recognize what you're saying, and we've seen it, the revolt and the moving of people towards parties that are promising solutions that they're not going to deliver. So it's very sad, you know. And then I don't think I managed to catch all the questions, but I just want to react to a few things like that. But
raw materials between Europe and China.
This I can't address. I mean, that was a specific question, I think, for the EU. But yes, the scientific evidence of goodness, I don't know. I think my impression when I was reading about that was it was actually addressed to Catholics who are who are shying away from seeing the evidence in some cases. And I think it was to say, look, people, this is not what we should be debating about. The science is not what we're debating about. If you don't agree with this proposal, don't use arguments that are based on science, because let's resolve that. The science is clear. If you want to have a discussion about your values, that's a different conversation. But the science, we're not going to debate. It's there, the evidence is there. And I think that for me, that's how I saw it, as being put as in, let's not have a false conversation about science. You know, it's already resolved. So those are my first reactions.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, it's clearly said by the Pope in Laudate Deum that it is trying to tackle climato-scepticism, because even inside the Catholic Church, he says, I find these kind of arguments. And I've met people using Laudato Si and the invitation to dialogue and to dialogue in science to justify the fact that we can't close the fact that there is no climate change. As the Pope is saying, we should continue to have conversation and to have dialogue, and we can't say, no, that's not the point. We have to have a fair dialogue and a scientific dialogue. We can't, in the name of dialogue, keep everybody around the table with the same voice, and the earth is flat. Okay, we can speak about it if you want. So I think the Pope is trying to say, okay, this is no more a point of debate, or yes, don't use arguments from Laudato Si or the Catholic teaching to do that. The interesting point is also that I think in September, the Pope published a text, nothing linked with ecology, but an invitation for theologates, the theology formation inside the Catholic Church, saying that theology should be more in dialogue with other disciplines. And in a way, as often, the Pope is saying and acting the same way. So he's doing what he's inviting us to do. And so he is developing Laudate Deum in dialogue with science, and doing this transdisciplinary approach he's inviting other people to do. So that's a very interesting point, and a very valuable way of doing things, because that's maybe why the world is listening to the Pope, even if they are not Catholics, is because there is a voice that has the actions and the speech that goes together. And in terms of sufficiency, maybe one interesting thing from a Catholic point of view, and that in a way, Lent time, the preparation for Easter, is a period to question our sufficiency. What do we really need? And it's not to reach sufficiency in itself, but a way to say, well, use these 40 days before the feast of Easter to question the level of sufficiency, to regain time, to regain maybe finance, to regain insight freedom, and it's a liberation. And so I think that as Christians, we should be able to take this question of ecology and the indispensable sufficiency question, not only the green growth or technology part. We should be quite at ease with this kind of conversation, because we have a specific liturgical moment where this is the question. So I hope that we can have this kind of conversation during one time. Not to say that we should not have it during the rest of the year, but we are trained for that in a way.
I think there was one more question here.
I think 3 minutes, if we can, and then we'll finish. People have to leave. If someone has to leave, please do. Otherwise, we have this small reception at the end.
My name is Julian. I work for the Catholic Church in Brussels about ecology. And so you mentioned the different level of power and decision making. And I was wondering what is expected from the church itself. So the Pope has really strong text with Laudato Si and then Laudate Deum. But what about the other levels for the church? What is expected from the conference of the bishops? What is expected from each diocese? What is expected from each parish to have prophetic voice in its family? My birthday. So, quick second question. You talked about courage. So we talked about sufficiency, but for us Catholics, we have evangelical virtue, which is positive. Is it possible to mention not only sufficiency, but to go deeper and mention quality as delivery, and it's important to fight against delivery, so to go deeper in the sense of this evangelical virtue.
I think that in terms of what is expected from the other, the Pope and then the dioceses, etc., the other structures of the church, there is in principle inside the Catholic social teaching about subsidiarity. So the Pope is not going to oblige bishops to do so or a religious congregation to do so. But I must say that, for example, as far as I know, the Catholic bishops in Belgium have invited people to go to a climate march in the coming weeks, or last month. This, for the moment, is not possible in France, for example. So I hope that this is only also a way to move inside the Catholic Church, that maybe some bishops can move quicker than others. Because the bishops in France are too divided around the ecological question. They spent 3 years of their annual meeting in Lourdes around ecology, and it was a very great renewal of this meeting, because it was not only bishops, every bishop was invited to come with a lay person or a religious person, anything, a man or women, to be part of the conversation. And this was a new way to do things. But at the end, they did not manage to agree on one text. They did not even manage to make a kind of French copy of Laudato Si, because ecology is seen as a political marker inside the political story of France, and part of the Catholic Church does not agree with the traditional ecological parties in France. So some of the bishops do not want to enter into this kind of conversation or engage in public engagement. But so we're not going to oblige people to be prophets. This is not the definition of the prophet. But what is really interesting in terms of poverty, and coming from a religious community and having a poor poverty, we went in the different Jesuit communities of my province to do a carbon footprint measurement. Every Jesuit was answering questions. And a very interesting thing is that Jesuits have a carbon footprint that is under the national average of Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. And part of it is because the consumption part is very, very low. And when we add this, we have evidences and figures. It was a way to say to Jesuit companions who may be afraid when you tell them, well, we should decrease the quantity of meat we have, we should invest money in the house to change the heating systems. So will all this change? Maybe not. So, well, look, you are not waiting for Black Friday as Easter time. And this is a good news. And you don't think about it, because you have made this war of poverty, and for you, Black Friday is not part of your way of life. and it's deeply rooted in your way of praying and following Christ. So what we are offering in terms of ecological transition is a kind of extension of this form of poverty that we only apply to general consumption. We don't go to movies every day, we don't buy new clothes every day, etc. This is normal for religious life. We just want to extend it to what we eat, the way we eat the house, and the way we travel. But we want to follow the same deep spiritual invitation of Christ to be poor like he was. And this, you see, this is also the spiritual door I was telling you before. This, for a number of Jesuits, this is a kind of discourse they can listen to. If you show that reducing the quantity of red meat you eat is not ecological ideology, but a way today to follow Christ poor and humble, then they will say, okay, I may agree to enter this way. So there is a very interesting thing here in terms of poverty.
I wanted to respond to that because it made me think that poverty also needs, I mean, as you said, that is an entry point, and for other people it could be a label because it's equivalent to suffering somehow and deprivation. But I think that if we formulate it more in terms of it addressing the need, the challenge of isolation and loneliness as well, because sharing addresses both the human need for contact and reduces consumption. And I think that there's also something there as a social problem that we have of people needing to be with others, but to share something, to share an object, to share a vehicle, to share tools, to share food, it also creates the contact that we need. So we'd be also addressing another problem that we have in our societies. So it's just something that it made me think of, because the community of circular economies or of sharing or of it also creates connection between people and greater resilience to shocks. So I think it's something we can learn also from the poor.
Johannes, I don't know if you also want a final word, so we close. It's an issue, but sorry. No. Well, thank you very much for coming. So we're very happy to have this discussion, and of course, we will continue these discussions. And very happy to welcome you here at COMECE. And I think at the end we will show you a very short clip. It's very short before we go to the other section. It's from a movie called which shares the story of about how change has been affecting their lives, and they can come together to one discuss about their experiences and solutions. And we will see a clip from, not from these four people actually, but from Cardinal, what's his name? Well, you preach us to the clip it's very uplifting.
Laudato Si, mi Signore, per frate Sole. I can say, even in my small way, that this is what I have experienced in my life as a Franciscan. The joy of possessing nothing, but enjoying everything. The creation doesn't belong to us. We have received it. We are not owners of nature.
Y Francisco es un hombre de la escucha. Escuchó la voz de Dios, escuchó la voz del pobre, escuchó la voz del enfermo, escuchó la voz de la naturaleza. Y deseo que la semilla de Francisco crezca en tantos corazones.
warmly invited to the next